I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, welcome to Arcane
Build
Mark.
a Hazard Workshop, where we're going to build a hazard based on the ideas and votes that we see in chat. So, first, when we're building just about anything, we need a concept, because we're going to build top-down here on Build a Hazard Workshop. And for this concept, we have asked people in chat to list a concept, and the one that we have so far is a red tea leaves hazard.
So is this going to be a red tea leaves, as in tea leaves that are red, or the act of reading the tea leaves?
It's red like R-E-D.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to check.
Because I said tea leaves were red, and since it was a homophone, Rico thought that they were the color red.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to be sure for the concept which one it is.
So he said he wrote red with the R-E-D, so I think that's what he's going for there. So
we get some other concept. Okay, yes, confirmed. All right, I wanted to make sure. You are always the literal reader, and I'm the one who's like, well, maybe it was possible.
He specifically said that it was because of the homophone.
All right, well, there you go. I wasn't paying enough attention to the chat. So concept number 1 we know is red tea leaves. Do we have other concepts that we can vote on?
Anything else that people want to see in terms of Build a Hazard Workshop? Otherwise, our hazard might just wind up being
the red tea leaves
out of no other ideas, but that certainly would not be as interesting as if we had multiple other thoughts for the hazards. So let's see if anybody else has anything that they'd like to do on this glorious hazard building Saturday.
It could also be another idea from Rico as well. It doesn't have to be somebody else.
Yes.
Angry mob as a hazard.
So we have angry mob and we have red tea leaves. Okay.
Very cool.
That's 2 ideas.
I think if we get a third one, then we should be good to do a vote.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what happened when we did our intro, like, a bunch of the people who were, we collected all the level 1 emotes.
Sweet.
A bunch of the people who were here dropped out at the intro. So it's possible that there aren't a lot of people who had thought up a concept in the past, and that have a concept from here now. All right.
What's the new emote that we got? Aha! Dranzior got a dolphin.
Dranzior got Hype Cool Dolphin. Alright. So, it looks like the idea we have for a hazard are red tea leaves or an angry mob hazard. But if anybody else has one, please put it in chat. Otherwise, vote 1 or 2. And type your vote into chat to see if we do red tea leaves or an angry mob. And we will be able to build, I think, a hazard based on either of those 2. Obviously, an angry mob is like more obviously a hazard, whereas red tea leaves, we're going to have to
figure out what that means.
Read the tea leaves among those red tea leaves.
But that'll take some more creativity
to determine.
So we have a vote for 2, a second vote for 2.
Angry mob. Okay.
So with the angry mob.
Okay, we're going to do an angry mob.
So one thing I want to figure out about this angry mob up front is this like a angry mob of living people, or is this like an angry mob haunt?
No, I think it's people. Because that was the concept, that it has to be the actual angry mob, not just like a haunt of ghosts. Oh yeah, it says people.
Yeah, I figured that I could see like a living or a haunted angry mob. But yeah, so this is a living angry mob.
So here's what I'm thinking. Most hazards, this is going to be a complex hazard. It's not just going to go once. It's an angry mob, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to decide simple or complex, but it's obviously complex because it doesn't make any sense for an angry mob to be something that just hits
you once and then it's like, oh, we're
and then
fine.
It's gone.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to have a trigger. We'll call it, I would say, ignite mob.
Yes. That sounds good.
This is for its reaction, Ignite Mob, where the mob gets ignited by something that makes them very angry.
And Rico makes an excellent point there. Attacking them is not really the intended way to defeat them, because otherwise it would be a troop. So,
Yes.
this is going to be a situation where, you might have, a bunch of, a bar brawl, or, a bunch of civilians who are, rallied up about something, and, you're not, the intended solution isn't I cast Fireball, because that's going to cause some serious issues.
That's right. So, I would say that they do have hit points, right? But you're basically a mass murderer if you try to defeat it with hit points instead of defeating it with intimidation or diplomacy or other things like that. Now, in the Rumplank pub crawl adventure that I ran for Linda and Steven and Vanessa and Nonat, I did something somewhat similar to this, where you could theoretically massacre them, but that you're also somewhat meant to defeat them with some social skills as well, and the group had to get out of that. So I see where we can go with this, and I think there's some good ways to get through. So
in terms of the sort of stealth and disable of this, the angry mob is going to be pretty darn obvious. There's no hiding the existence of an angry mob.
Well, I think that maybe there is, because the reaction Ignite Mob is when some kind of provocateur or other action
right. So you notice the people, but
causes
you
them
didn't notice
to rile up into a mob.
Right, yeah. So it's noticing the moment where it goes from a tense situation into this is going to be dangerous.
Right. So there's the moment of ignition when the mob just suddenly goes from just a whole bunch of people into just this really angry mob.
Yes.
And so that is that's why it might be harder to tell. And even if you fail to and also noting that it's a complex hazard, that just means it has a certain initiative modifier that it rolls.
Yes.
And yeah, they look like a regular crowd because of quote stealth DC. And technically
stealth bonus,
it's a modifier, and technically hazards roll stealth, but in this case I might even say it's like a deception DC, because it's they're just a regular crowd at first until the provocateur, or maybe even the people themselves, know that they're about to go up into a mob. You can decide as the GM and use this hazard in multiple ways what the spark that lit the mob's anger was. So okay, that's a good starting point that we have here for building this angry mob. So we know that it's a complex hazard, and honestly, the fact that there's a crowd here, I feel like means that it's not going to be that hard to tell that something bad could happen.
But what's going to be harder in terms of the picking something between stealth and disable to be harder. What's going to be harder is calming them all down.
It's like if you go to an online message board.
Yeah.
There's not always a flame war there. There are a lot of people. And you kind of know that there might be a flame war there at some point if you stay there for too long. And so I feel like it probably has a low stealth modifier. But before we figure out what the actual numbers are, let's think about what level this hazard would be. How dangerous is this angry mob? That might also give us a flavor sense of how many people are in the mob.
I feel like, an angry mob is probably not going to be super high level, because it's probably comprised of more normal everyday people, as opposed to an angry mob of trained soldiers.
I agree.
Because at that point you would be looking more at
I think that you would be able, in your town, if you're not the PCs, you're the mayor, and there's an angry mob, you probably should be able to, if you want to be known as the mayor who massacred their own city and everyone hates you, you probably should be able to unleash a city guard squadron on this angry mob and win. Unless it's a very big mob that might require multiple city guard squadrons, or bringing in a Hell Knight brigade to defeat them, right?
Although I would think at that point,
So Rico's saying maybe 6 or 7, in which case this is a bigger mob. It's one
mob,
that just one squadron of city guards would not be enough to disperse it. It's particularly angry. And Chris Abbott says, a gathering of apprentices from all guilds filter into the market square. One of them climbs on a statue and begins screaming, better conditions or no more compliant submission. You can't kill them because they're the next generation of trained artisans and laborers. Yeah, that's a good example of how to use this hazard. I think this hazard has multiple uses. So, okay, we can go with the idea that it could be level 6 or 7, in which case
we're going to have a very
big mob.
this is a huge mob. So it's going to be covering a giant area as well.
Right. So yes, it should definitely be a wide area because a city guard squadron is taking up like 16 squares worth of guards, and they're not going to be able enough. You would probably say that 2 city guard squadrons is a question. What's going to happen. And especially since if this mob does area damage, that's like the weakness that the guard squadron has. Although maybe the mob is also weak to, it should be weak to area damage as well because it's a giant mob.
And another echo from Troop that makes sense to me for this one is that troops, you know, as you damage them, shrink in size, and sometimes hazards weaken as you get their disabled checks as well. So having that sort of mechanic in this to echo that troop and also make it cover less space.
Okay, so we're going to go with it being a complex hazard 7. Now, due to the fact that just like you always know that maybe if there's a group of people that they could get riled up into
also
a mob.
That many people being there,
that's a lot. It's already was a lot of people that attended an event, and if you're anybody who's trained at like in like policing or espionage or something like that, then you always know, like, if there's a giant crowd of people around you, you need to be on your guard, whether or not there's somebody who's going to be like throwing a Molotov cocktail into the middle of it and turning it into a mob.
Yeah.
So I think that pretty clearly this should be a low so that would be a plus 13 for its initiative. I would say, like, deception plus 13 for its initiative because of the fact that there's probably someone in there who's doing it. It's not that, like, you can't see that there are people there, right? And Tella de Locadores points out losing actions as they lose hit points is something that hazards sometimes do.
That totally makes sense for the decrease as well.
It could also be that based on some of the other statistics as we go through. So let's think also, we've got its stealth DC. Let's talk about disabling it. So, you've got this angry mob, and they're really mad about something. So, you can either attack them and try to kill them off. You could probably try to use
diplomacy,
intimidation.
Intimidation to frighten
them down.
Yeah.
Like, against a large mob, that's probably easier than using diplomacy to convince them.
Yes.
And then you could also possibly try to reason with them using a lore associated with their thing, which, whatever they're talking about, which is very unlikely to work and probably just gives them a buff from being angrier. It probably just stokes their rage when you're like, well, actually, angry mob, your conditions aren't as bad as you say. When you compare them to the people who are being flesh warped in the down below in the Darklands, your conditions of working are much better than that. And also, when compared to the mindless zombies in Geb, you're being paid less than an amount that you would need, but the zombies aren't being paid anything.
Yes.
And thanks for gifting.
This does imply a mechanic of, like, if you critically fail your check to disable, then something bad might also happen to you.
Yes, I think that if you critically fail your check to disable, then it makes the mob stronger. And I also think that if you fail regularly with lore, then it makes the mob stronger because of the fact that they just don't really want to listen to it. And it's probably extremely difficult. So let's go into that. Let's go back into those disabled DCs. So I would say that the lore is 30. The lore /knowledge skill, like related knowledge or lore.
Yeah, and what that is would depend upon why the mob is angry.
Or I would say 30 for
knowledge and maybe a little
non-lore,
lore.
28 for lore.
Yeah, because the lore should be a little
easier. The lore
easier
should be a little easier. Like if you have labor lore or whatever. But it's still really not how you can actually disperse a mob is by like being like going out into the middle of the mob and being like, "You're wrong, mob." That's not always gonna work. It's not a good way to deal with an actual literal angry mob. Now, people might say, especially since Rico was probably inspired by like online events to create this mob hazards. Like, well, Mark, does that mean you were just doing something that was completely guaranteed to fail when you went on to streams in the last few days? And I would say no, because actually people who are upset with things in the game are not an angry mob. And therefore, if you analyze something and talk it through, then I think that there's discourse to be had on all sides. But when you're dealing with a real, actual angry mob that has mobilized and is literally causing physical harm and killing people who get crushed in the mob, that's different.
Now, is there one thing that this makes me wonder about is there a way to get them to like not attack you? But not attack you, but they're still doing their thing because they see you as like...
I think probably not, because of the fact that the mob is pretty indiscriminate. Like, in general, an angry mob...
Yeah, I guess at that point...
It's like how at mosh pits, you can get crushed even if you're one of the people in the mosh pit.
Yeah, I feel like probably you at that point would be doing some kind of mechanic for like, and I am joining the mob, and then that's like, you're definitely not disabling the hazard at that point.
Right. I would say that the mob probably deals itself a small amount of damage every turn just because of hurting themselves by incidentally. And that there might be some way that if you use like stealth or deception to try to pretend to be part of the mob, that you take the incidental amount.
Yeah, so you take less damage, but you're not actually working toward disabling at that point.
That's right. So diplomacy against the mob is probably going to be, let's say diplomacy is high, is 27.
And then maybe intimidation is kind of
low.
like,
because actually, just legitimately, there's a lot of weak people in that mob that you probably could scare by yelling at them.
So the next thing to think about here, I would say, is how many successful checks do you need to totally disperse the mob?
So we decided that it was big. Let's say, for the sake of our argument here, that it is like an 8x8 square.
Yeah.
So that means it's 40 feet by 40 feet worth of mob, which means that roughly the city guard squadron would be half the one that is equal strength would be about half the area because they're more trained than this mob is. And the one that would almost definitely win, according to at least the encounter building rules, is 3/4 of the area worth of city guards. So I would say that if we said it was 40 by 40, then we could have like thresholds where it weakens down to like
take off one of the sections,
or where it weakens down to like 30.
Oh yeah, so do it that way where it's
30 by 30, which actually they lose a very large percentage.
I was thinking about potentially cutting it into 4 pieces.
So that would make it a weirder shape.
Yeah,
I think. So
maybe the thresholds aren't linear then.
It could be that it goes 40 to 35 to 30 to 20 to 10 to gone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just because the amount of people that you lose from 40 to 30 is a lot, and the amount that you lose from 30 to 20 is not as many because
math.
Because math, quadratic formula. So
that means that it takes a total of 5 successes to completely disable the hazard.
Yes. It takes a total of 5 successes to completely disable the hazard, and a intimidation critical success could be something that was likely to happen. That also means that it should probably get weaker for sure along the way, because that's a lot of successes that it takes to get rid of the hazard. Not that like the PCs, if they have a lot of intimidators, can't get through it quickly.
Mhm.
So that's what we've got there.
And we are going to assume, I imagine, that it's the usual, like, 2 actions for a disable attempt.
Yep, that's how the disables go.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got defenses. So these guys are commoners.
They probably don't have
They have
great AC.
probably the low AC.
But they probably have a lot of hit points because there's a lot of them.
Yes, I think so. So like AC 22, but a lot of hit points, but a weakness to
area. And they probably don't have hardness at all. So
I don't think they do.
So their hit points are going to
They
be...
probably have way more hit points than this
yes.
by virtue of not having hardness and having a weakness to area.
Yes.
So like normally they would have 60 hit points, but with like a 15 hardness, which the 15 hardness does a lot. So I would say maybe this has like, it's got really low AC for a hazard.
Yeah, it's 100 and something.
Yeah, let's give it like just a ridiculous amount. 150. Because also it needs to be a multiple of 5.
Yes.
Because you get like sort of 1 success for each time you do 30 damage. So it's got 150, weakness 10, area, weakness 5, splash.
Yeah.
And every 30 equals 1 success. Which basically, so like if you do 30 damage to it, you kill it down from the 40 to the 35.
Yes.
And if you do 1 success, you get it from the 40 to the 35. And if you critically succeed, basically then like getting a 33 on your intimidation is like doing 60 damage.
Yes.
And getting a 23 on your intimidation is like doing 30 damage.
And that way those 2 tracks do
that way it's
work
not
together.
like completely separate. Whereas a lot of hazards it is separate, but or unless they're like in different pieces that one person disables one person destroys the other, but this one we're going to be able to combine it, because if you partially murdering them and partially intimidating them, that could work together. Now, partially murdering them and partially using diplomacy is maybe a little weird.
Yeah.
But maybe it's like, come on, I don't like what this person is doing who's killing you. We just want to be friends. Be friends. I know we just killed your wife, but think about this. Think about this rationally, friend.
It definitely seems like diplomacy should become harder if you're doing that. But that's something that the GM can.
We could also say that DC's other than intimidation, intimidation increase by 2. Or no, let's say increase by 1 for every threshold
reached,
of damage.
Yes.
Intimidation decreases by 1 for every threshold of damage. So, basically, if you do 30 damage to them and cause a threshold decrease due to damage, it raises the difficulty of the non-intimidation ones and lowers the difficulty of intimidation.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
So that means if you murder them down 120 to damage, then the difficulty to diplomacy, those very last like 1/16 of the mob, is like 31,
it's
and
ridiculous,
to use your society check on them is 34, but intimidate is only 19 because you killed 15/16 of them.
Yes.
And I think that makes sense. Dranzior says, in that case, it's 2 party members that really don't agree.
Yes.
When one's diplomacy and one's murder clees. All right, so let's talk about their saving throws before we go.
Saving throws first, yes.
So they usually, we're going to have like maybe a high and a low.
Yeah, but they're going to need a will as well because they're like people.
Most of things do not have
other than haunts,
a will save, but they're going to need a will save. So they are alive. So I would say that probably
Fort is probably going to be their best, whereas Reflex is going to be their worst because of their ability to like move with a tightly packed
Will
crowd.
is medium, or is it a high because of the fact they've just been so enraged.
Yes.
So I would say then that's going to be Fort plus 20, Will plus 18, Reflex plus 12. There's just a packed crowd area. Like, look, if you want to fireball these foos, they going down.
But then, yeah, you also fireball your reputation.
You're also probably maybe really a terrible person.
Yes.
But they are going down. As they, like, burn and smolder and, like, they die with the final battle cry of Fireball's damage is really weak anyway.
Alright, so speaking of offense.
Alright.
Because you've killed
15 16ths of them is a weirdly specific sentence.
Yes.
Speaking of offense.
Mm-hmm.
So, probably I'm thinking that they do AoE damage to everybody who's inside of the mob and a little bit to themselves that does not use their area weakness.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Using the high DC.
So then they probably like do a fair amount of damage to start with, but it's still like a giant area, so then it's going to lower over time as you weaken the hazard.
So, let's say that they do their hazard action is just one action, and they're a hazard, so they can't like be slowed or whatever, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Or no, maybe it's 2 action routine, and what they do is they move. So they move it move up to 25 feet, and then deal. Let's look at the hazard building guidelines. 2d10 plus 9 damage with a...
Is it bludgeoning damage?
DC 25 reflex save. 2d10 plus 9 bludgeoning damage. DC 25 reflex save.
Because I feel like they're probably more likely to be like throwing stones and other things rather than having a lot of weapons.
I think that seems right to me. And the damage decreases to 2d10 plus 6, 2d10 plus 3, 2d10.
Maybe lower the die size so it's not all before, because you're gonna need to lower the die size at some point, but so that it's not
sure. 2d6 10 plus 6, 2d8 plus 6, 2d8 plus 3.
Yeah.
Because 2d10 plus 9 is still mostly dice. So let's say 2d8 plus 3, 2d6 plus 3. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Or I don't know, we can do 2d4 plus 3. The small one is pretty small. There's not that many people left. So, and then obviously it doesn't do any damage when it's defeated.
Yes.
So, yeah, it goes down from 2d10 plus 9 to 2d10 plus 6, 2d8 plus 6. I mean, actually, we could do a die size every time and do less of changing the other things. So let's see. If we did 2d8 plus 8, we could do 2d6 plus...
Because you want to go down by about 4?
But if we did go down by about 3 each time, 2d6 plus 7... Oh, no, I see.
No, you have 2. You don't have enough dice.
There's not enough dice sizes to actually accomplish that. We could do 2...
Unless you started with 10 in the biggest one.
We could do 2d8 plus 8, 2d6 plus 7, 2d6 plus 4, 2d4 plus 4.
Yeah, we could.
I think that
I was thinking about generally trying to balance...
Or 2d4 plus 3.
Yeah, generally trying to balance so that it has a some static and some random.
Yep. That makes sense to me. So, here we go. Rigo says, what I really like about this hazard is so far it's mechanically interesting and help represents the strength of the mechanical approach in Pathfinder 2e, but also puts an interesting set of choices in front of the players with a lot of potential story consequences. Yeah, I think so. I'm going to put Mob Hazard here.
Go and save it, for later.
As its name.
What does the Ignite Mob reaction do? Is it just rolling initiative, or does it do something else at that moment?
I would say that Mob rolls initiative... Oh yeah, we also should determine what happens on what happens when they get mad. Let's see. When crit fail, disable, or fail knowledge, lore, skill, then mob gains 15 temporary hit points and a +3 status bonus to damage.
On its next attack?
For 1 round.
Yeah.
So basically they're as angry as one size higher.
Yes.
because you tried to reason with them and failed the knowledge check, or you critically failed something else.
So in that case, it doesn't necessarily need to do something else on the ignition. The other way I was potentially, I like
it could
that
also
one.
be that mob rolls initiative and gains the 15 temp HP.
Yeah.
And +3 status bonus.
That makes sense. I was thinking that those two might interact, because the other way I was thinking about it is sort of like the Ignite Mob is like, kind of a sort of a ranged attack salvo or something that's an initial, like, hey, we're starting this assault. And then the crit fail would be like another instance of that activation. So this is the other way around, and I think that works well for those two to
Yeah, I would say basically when you crit fail, disable or fail, regular fail.
Because they both cause to do
the knowledge
extra
lore.
damage.
The mob gains the benefits of Ignite Mob other than rolling initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes sense because
you're also
it's like the provocateur is igniting them, and then you're igniting them.
And that also means because you don't have like stacking or what have you. That even if a lot of people are completely flubbing things, you can't like make them even angrier for that round.
Yes, that's why I made it temporary hit points and a status bonus, because I didn't want you to get into a death spiral where suddenly everybody tried to argue with them about the math of their wages or something like that, where it's like, no, your wages are higher than you think because you didn't take into account that artisans were not taxed under this other thing. And then they just don't listen and they all fail, and then the damage goes up by 12 or something like that. That would be ridiculous. So let's see. Do we need anything other than I think we have it all now.
I think so
we got this.
We have the offense and the defense. We have the all-important, the hazard rolls initiative line for a complex hazard.
We sure do.
And this isn't the kind of hazard that would have a reset, so...
Yeah, I mean, given that you disperse them, like the reset would be like another group of people must gather.
Yeah.
And have something else to be angry about.
Yes.
Right? It's not
mob. It's not even. That's why I say it's not a reset.
I say it's not.
Instance,
it would be a different mob at that point. It's angry about
reset.
A different thing, and then therefore has a different lore skill
and
you
different
might be able
other
to
things. And they might be like a different leveled version of this.
Reset. Crowd reforms in 1d6 days if demands not met.
Yeah, that's...
Well, especially if you defeat them with diplomacy and make promises that you don't keep.
Yeah.
But
I think that the reset, when you're putting this thing out, the reset, if it exists, is going to be so context dependent that's more like the GM decides rather than something that's automatic enough to put in the mechanics.
Also, if we're assuming that the mob, had very legitimate concerns that should be addressed, then it wouldn't be realistic. It would shatter my verisimilitude if after people lie and claim that they're going to fix things, that the mob was able to regather the same momentum and come back every time until you actually fix it, because realistically, that tactic works of lying, be like, oh yeah, we'll fix it, and dispersing people, and then just never fixing it.
Or you may have a situation where what happens is such an insult that a larger mob builds the next time.
You could do that. Even defeating the mob with damage could just make people even angrier.
Yeah.
Could have an entire insurrection. So it seems like Rico is probably going to use this for, Grigory or something like that. But you never know. So we've got this angry mob.
Yes.
And yes, it's a complex hazard. Its name is Angry Mob. It's probably... Wasn't there, a magic card, Angry Mob, that had, star, attack and... toughness? Yeah, it was trample. During your turn, it gained power and toughness equal to the total number of swamps all opponents control. There you go. So
why do swamps make the mob angrier? Is it
because it's a white mob, and so it gets angry about because it gets angry about swamps, which are the black mana producers.
Okay, fair enough.
And in the way that it's like they're like the holy, and it's like these swamps are producing necromancy, and we're very angry about the undead.
There's a question: if you imagine a higher level variant of the hazard, what could that be? Some kind of magically enraged group, a bunch of summons placed by a particularly nefarious ritualist? I think magically enraged is probably more, or magically bolstered is probably more where you would go, because in order to not be a troop, this still kind of needs to retain some degree of like, and talking them down is a very valid thing to do.
Yes, I think that it might be not only of more people, but might be bespokely riled up by like the Zealous Conviction spell or something similar to the Zealous Conviction spell.
Yeah, because there's so many of them, probably like a ritualized version of that sort of thing. Yeah,
something like Zealous Conviction gives everybody who's under it temporary hit points and will saves, and they must follow your commands and your request. And so if there's a ritualized version of that, you could imagine it giving massive number of hit points, maybe gives more defenses than just will saves, and that could explain why the DC is so hard to convince them, because on regular Zealous Conviction, they must do what the Provocateur says.
Or there may also be like
the ritual is probably weaker, and therefore it's possible to convince them, but it's very difficult.
But you could also be something where it's like, you know, demonic corruption has seeped into the waterways, and like everyone in this town is then like affected by it, and so they become stronger and also like enraged by this, and then they're going to attack, but like...
They drank the fairy wine.
Yeah.
And the fairy wine of the Bacchae, and now they've become maenads, and they're just going into a frenzy, is another possibility. Lava Bean says, are there rules for hazards becoming more dangerous if the party doesn't address them properly? For example, an angry crowd hazard progressing to a riot hazard. There can be. They're like fire hazards that part of their routine is to spread the fire. So if you're not firefighting and removing the squares, then the fire gets worse. Speaking of which, I forgot to put in this, but that the mob also damages.
Oh yeah, it also damages self
for probably like 1d10.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it'd be self and PCs hiding or using deception to
blend
into Bob for 1d10, which does not apply area weakness.
Yes. Legit?
Oh wait, no, actually, no, it doesn't work to damage the PCs that way. I was gonna be like, they could damage themselves for only their area weakness.
No, you can't, because then the PCs,
would not. It wouldn't. Say
yeah, well, also like it makes sense that that's not area weakness, because that came from like individual people hitting individual people, and not like a huge. And there's a question: should the self-damage have its own start point? Is that like when it gets down to a certain degree of?
I just figure that
it's probably
any round that they're moving around.
Oh, I see. So that the mob doesn't just destroy itself in 3 minutes if left alone.
Ah, I see. Like. That's probably a good point, that it may be too much damage because it destroys itself too quickly.
So I could also see that, yeah, also maybe it only damages itself on rounds when it's dealing damage to someone else.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So that way it's not just destroying itself automatically, but when they are actually trying to attack others, then it's collateral.
That makes sense. And we could make it be 1d6 if we want. The question, maybe it's 1d10 and it's collateral damage. So when the mob is, but I think Rico's right that it destroys itself too quickly.
Then yeah, you don't have as much of a threat. So 1d6 collateral, yeah.
Then we could say that the self damage decreases to 1d4 after at the size of 20. And 0 at 10, because there's few enough of them that they don't hurt themselves anymore at that point.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think that makes sense. Or maybe 1d4 at 30 and 0 at 20.
Yeah.
And once they're 20, then they're about the size of a troop, and so they
troops don't always damage each other. Yep.
So
then it can't destroy itself.
It can't destroy itself, but it can manage to get itself down to a quarter of its original size by the most zealous and athletically strongest of themselves.
But at that point,
they've like done
so much
killing
damage.
attacks on like 40 times on other creatures.
So yeah, good luck if you're still alive.
They've done at that point 400 damage.
Yes.
Oh, wait, no. 800 damage.
Right, because it's 2D. Yeah.
To everything in their area. By the time that they have gotten themselves down to 1/4
I think that
size.
makes a lot of sense.
All right. So we now have an angry mob. It can be as angry as you want it to be.
Yeah.
What? What?
I just had
pointed to something.
Oh, before we posted it, I had a minor stylistic.
Oh yeah, you could make some changes once we're off the stream. So, thanks for joining us, everybody. Let's say goodbye to YouTube and then do our outro with non-YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.